Just before dawn, the tide pulls a long breath and holds it, as if the ocean has seen something the town has not. On a Washington spit beneath a sky the color of cold tin, a dog lifts its head inside a stilted house and stares at the floor. A glass hums in the sink, a high violin note that stops when a fingertip touches it. Out by the river mouth, fog hangs and folds over the channel markers and a gull rides the flat. Inside the house, a woman cracks an egg into a pan and hears her phone. Make a sound she does not recognize. 3 short tones, a pause, and then a sentence that turns her hands to air. Earthquake, detected, drop, cover, hold on. The dog is already under the table. She has practiced, but practices are not mornings. Her knee bangs the chair. She crawls. The counter does a slow sway like someone tugging a rug and then letting go. The first motion is a flutter. The second makes the window frames flex in and out like the house's lungs. 10 miles away in a school gym where bleachers smell of varnish and last month's game, a janitor leans his shoulder into a rolling cart and feels the wheels lift off the floor for the fraction of a second that tells the body this is not local. Under a strip of gray water 100 miles offshore, the world is moving. A plate of ocean floor is being dragged beneath a continent in a zone so wide you could fly for an hour over it and not guess what is happening. For centuries, the shallow part of that interface, where rock rubs rock gently and then locks, has been stuck. The land above has been bowing like a board bent under weight. Tonight, the board snaps. A piwavda, fast, breathy, one trans. The real violence toward land and into phones, and sirens, and the hearts of everyone who signed up to have their day interrupted by the one thing no one can stop. In a lab on a hill in Corvallis, a seismologist who has given talks in school auditoriums about ghost forests watches needle lines on a screen fatten into bands. In Portland, a pump operator in an industrial district where tanks sit shoulder to shoulder on a river levee. Here's an intercom. Click. All hands. All hands. Secure the yard, then secure yourselves. In Seattle, a nurse sets a palm on a patient's shoulder and sets gently into the air. We're going to be very still for a few minutes, as if the building were a person who could listen. This false name is a poem that does not rhyme. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, a seam nearly 700 miles long where prehistoric cedar roots, Japanese scrolls, and silt at the bottom of submarine canyons all agree on a single story. They tell of a winter night in 1700 when the tide went wrong in a country 3,000 miles away and swept into fishing villages. With no warning. They tell of a sudden death in tree rings on a coast where the ground dropped and salt water came in to stay, and of layers of underwater avalanches stacked like pages that slid the way only quake-shaken sediments slide. In the last 10,000 years, this fault has let go many times. Dozens and some small, some that unzip the whole length, water and rock remaking the map. It has been long enough since the last of those that people now say the word overdue with their shoulders and then correct themselves. Not overdue, just inevitable. In a council house upriver, drawings on a wall remember a wave that came in the night. An elder has told the same story to children with their shoes off and their feet on cedar planks. When the earth tells you its mind, you do not stand still to listen. You move. Today, blue and white signs point uphill. Lanes on roads have arrows that no one notices on ordinary days because they look like part of the scenery. The woman in the stilted house has packed a bin she labeled go. She knows where her headlamp is. She can find the dog leash blind. The P-wave is gone. For a heartbeat the air feels thick, as if everything has been painted a shade heavier. Then the S-wave arrives like a decision. Across the basin and over the first low ridges, light posts begin to draw jellyfish arcs. In the Duwamish Flats south of Seattle's towers, fill that has been good enough to stand on for a century begins to behave like liquid. In a brick corner of Portland's Old East Side, mortar old as the telephone, drizzles into a stairwell. The long, slow roll is here now, and it carries in it the weight of a country-sized fault returning to the place it would have been if nobody had ever tried to hold it. A teacher at a coastal elementary school looks up at the second-story doors that lead to a flat roof with a railing built for the day no one wants stairs. Painted a cheerful blue for small legs, heavy gates that swing outward. She has practiced for this. Coaches have timed the sprint, counted little heads, argued about who carries which medical kit. In Tokeland, A concrete tower in a tribal village that knows its roots are older than any map waits quietly with its staircase, hung in the air, a ladder to a safe place, designed by people who refuse to let geography decide. In garages, cars. Megaquake, a father in a small town that was once only a mill and is now also a place where people try to escape their own cities, flips on his headlights and sees shaking power lines throw small, blue tongues against the air. He kills the engine. They taught him what happens when everyone tries to drive. His zipsacoat gets his daughter's hand around his index finger, like when she was small, and steps into the street, which is moving in a way streets should not move. The woman under the table hears a new sound, deeper than wood and wind. It comes through the bones, not the ears. A sound she will not forget as long as she lives. The pan has slid to the floor. The egg is becoming a state she cannot name. Her phone face down flashes a single word that blinks and vanishes before she can read it. A cupboard door swings open. A line moves through the house from one corner to the other, like someone dragging a weight along under the floor. The heavy part is on its way. Floor joists speak when they are asked to flex beyond what they were born for. In small towns and big cities, nails complain. Glass becomes a thing between a liquid and a knife, and everything with water in it sloshes to its own rhythm. From Eureka to Vancouver Island, the same act plays itself out with local dialects. Beneath horizons, tuned mass dampers sway like heartbeat meters. Under modular classrooms, the ground loses its resolve and then returns to itself in a moan. In Seattle, the basin shows its talent for song. The glacial soft sediments that fill the city's low bowl catch the long period waves like a drummer's skins and make them larger. Towers whisper and flex as engineers intended, while brick buildings older than the word seismic toss cornices into the street. A man who sells used records for a living crawls past a rack that is singing to itself, 100 sleeves ticking in chorus, and keeps his head down. Along the waterfront, the seawall that was renovated because someone once looked honestly at old timbers remembers its earthquake homework. But a few hundred yards away in Pioneer Square, a sentry hangs in dusty light as cracks, pencil down plaster and then turned by choice where a mason long dead laid his hand to light. In Portland, bridges draw themselves higher and lower against the postcards in people's heads. The steel the arch, the slices of deck hung on cables. They are not falling. They are doing something scarier if you have never watched. They are moving. On the west bank of the Willamette, where the pipes and tanks in an industrial zone form a forest of metal that was never meant to lean, a technician adjusts a valve while watching a tank's roof walk like the diaphragm of a breathing animal. Beneath everything, the riverbank, a wide fan of fill and river mud, wakes and sighs. Later, they will call it differential settlement. Now it is a giant shifting in the sleep it has preferred for 100 years. The pump operator's radio says one word: secure. Then it goes quiet. Across the yard, a man with a crescent wrench in his back pocket looks at the row numbers painted on the sides of white cylinders and knows them the way you know the birthdays in your family. He looks down at his boots and the way the gravel seems to run like water, and he makes a call. His company told him they would back. He walks away, head down, counting steps, unable to take his eyes off the ground. In the city's core, a lab tech at a hospital slides a hand under a spinning centrifuge and breaks it gently, while a surgical team holds their instruments steady inside someone's open body, counting, breathing, waiting for the slow to reach stop. The first minute passes. A second. Near the coast, the shaking stays roar, closer to the source. There are no long delays. The muscles in the earth are right there under your feet. Coastal bluffs crack open in a geologic shrug. Parts of the shoreline drop a foot and then 4. Tide lines slipping a sudden stair-step lower so that salt water will find places to live later it never could before. In one harbor, a section of dock tiers, tethers singing before they part, and boats waltz in their slips like bad dancers who refuse to find the beat. Hills give up the steeper slopes they had been clinging to for a decade of storms. A brown scar runs down into a culvert and chokes it. The watery air is full of smell mud torn up, 2 from deeper than the clams reach. Cold sap, gasoline, the copper temps of a transformer's last complaint. On the coast, the sirens have already taken their first breath. The teacher at the elementary school stands at the door to the blue stairs and holds up her hand, palm flat, waiting for the way she has asked a class of 4th graders to learn what quiet is. They give it to her. Then she turns her hand, and they move as if someone pulled a string out and up. Little legs, big legs. Every leg counted. A custodian who runs marathons on weekends puts a bundle of clipboards under one arm and a defibrillator under the other. By the time the second flight begins, air is moving around their bodies exactly like it does when you walk toward the wind on the beach. Only this wind is the ground itself. Down the road in a village, at the mouth of a river, a concrete tower built by a tribal government rises out of the marsh grass stairs wrapped in the air, with a top that looks out over the Pacific. When they built it, some called it impossible. When they opened it, the first to climb those stairs were kids, legs stuttering like they do when you laugh and run at the same time. Today, as climbing has no jokes, there's the measured, spare breath of fear used in exactly the right way. Cars idle and then don't. Traffic at the edge of the beach tries to swallow itself and fails. Then someone remembers the drills and leaves it in the road, around a bend on a rise covered in salal and shore pine. People separate and together fall into a line you could draw on the map in blue highlighter if you've ever looked at the posters pinned in feed. Stores and post offices up and down this coast. Tsunami evacuation route up. A fisherman old enough to have hands like kelp rope takes a toddler from a mother without speaking and settles him on his hip, and the kid goes still from the message in the older body's jaw. Inland, the early warning gave seconds that matter. Train operators braked. Surgery paused. Fire stations' doors rose before the power flickered. Engines nosed out like animals tasting a new world. Elevators stopped at the nearest floors and yawned open. Lobbies briefly filled with people standing exactly 2 inches from a wall with their palms on it, as if that could give them something back that the air took suddenly away. In the lifeline departments, the ones with maps and radios and acronyms binders, with names like Cascadia Playbook came down off hooks. The first pages are always the same. Check your people. Check your place. Speak with the voice the public needs. Then the pages become rivers and roads, fuel and water. Lists of bridges in the order they matter. The rolling doesn't stop for a respectable amount of time. It stops in a way that offends the body. Then, in a small pity of physics, it pauses for long enough to let hope stand up, and a ripple of relief moves through all the rooms at once, like the lazy part of the tide. And then an aftershock hits hard enough to be its own quake. A reminder that from now on, for a while, the ground has a cough. By the time the teacher counts and counts again at the top of the roof, the ocean has begun to behave like a person leaving a room in a hurry. It drains in a way that makes your stomach say no. Boats settle on their keels. A sandbar shows itself that nobody has seen since the last big winter. Seals raise heads like periscopes and look surprised. The horizon does not grow higher in a filmic way. It changes texture. A low hump moving too fast to belong to water. The woman with the dog backs toward the white line painted at the roofs. Edge for exactly this day and feels for her against her calf. The dog does not bark. The dog breathes like someone who has run a long time and is saving the rest for what is next. Somewhere near the willows along the slough, a siren that had cut out tries again and finds its voice. It is not louder than the sound coming from the ocean now. The sound is 1,000 doors closing, 1,000 pieces of timber knocked together end to end. Under it is a note that belongs to things too big to sing. The last lot at the bottom of the hill empties. A truck turned diagonal by a panicked hand sits with its driver's side door open, steaming, in a useless, beautiful way. On the school roof, the children hold hands of their own accord, because that is what children do when they are afraid and know that they are not alone. The man who knows the birthdays of steel tanks puts his palm against a chain-link fence and watches the river slap against its bank in a rhythm that has nothing to do with wind. There is a moment in which the world holds two truths. The shaking is over, and nothing important has finished. What follows big subduction earthquakes is not just one sentence. It is a paragraph you read with your breath held. On the outer coast, ground that held cedar for 500 years has dropped 6 feet in places. The salt that always wanted to live here wants to live higher. Pilings that were once high and dry at low tide are now shy. Logs that made good benches will try to float away. On one stretch of sand a mile long, the earth is split and become two shelves that do not want to sit even again. No one will be shocked to find a new creek tomorrow where there was no creek yesterday. Inside the cities, tall buildings talk in their own language, steel giving back what it took and keeping the rest. Inside a dental office in Tacoma, The aquarium is a wet glitter on the carpet. One fish finds a cup with water and stays exactly still, as if it knew the word for prayer. In Olympia, the dome of the Capitol building looks intact from a distance. And from up close, has grows of hairline, cracks like crow's feet, showing how it smiled through something it didn't think was funny. Inaberton cal -sac. The lawn of a new house tilts, and the water in a swimming pool writes every letter it can before it throws water out over the coping, and shows the absent letter in the alphabet, Q for quake. At the river's edge in Portland's northwest industrial rattan area, planners call, with terminal clarity, the critical energy infrastructure. Hubmen and women who make the modern city run by pumping fuel through its veins stand with clipboards and radios and do the work they talk about only in rooms without windows. They listen to tanks knock their roofs. They watch the line where the riverbank meets the river to see if the bank will be something else in an hour. Someone writes sheen and the time of day in neat letters. Someone else writes sloughing. There is no alarm with a song for this. There are just checklists and the knowledge of where the shutoff is without thinking about it. Down along Seattle's industrial Duwamish corridor, forklifts sit at angles that speak the language of future meetings. A bridge that leads to the neighborhood named for a century-old shipyard goes quiet, then opens partway as if it intends to present its intestines to the sky. Its operators stare at a bank of dead gauges, then at each other. Manual, one says, and the word tastes like iron in his mouth. Somewhere near Georgetown, a warehouse built in a year when the code only thought of snow says enough, and slides one wall down onto the pavement, politely missing a parked car by a few inches and giving up its raw timber frame. Beautiful and spent, hours stretch and take shapes they did not use to have. Aftershocks drum the background. People learn the trick of standing with feet apart on uneven ground, hands loose, looking up only at things that could fall. In Astoria, a statue of a woman looking out to sea for someone who never returned to her, has her gaze interrupted by cranes that have been told to stop, frozen at half-mast in the harbor like a salute held in the air. In the coastal towns, the water that left is returning in manners that do not obey tide tables. In some places, the first surges are errand runners, carrying boats into parking lots and then back, feeling out the corners of streets with their wet hands. In a pinch of a bay up the coast, the geometry of the shoreline makes a bowl. There, smaller landslides triggered by the main shock pour into the water and lifted with sudden, local malice. The result is not the great wave everyone uses when they draw a disaster with a pencil. It is a set of pulses that take the breath of those who stayed too long. A pair of brothers hauling crab pots along a jetty look at each other, drop the rope without a word, and go. Up at the school roof, the measured quiet the quiet a teacher has been able to enforce with nothing more than her hands, and a tone has dissolved into small sounds that are not panic, but are not stillness. Text messages bloom and die in pockets as the air finds and then loses its grip on signals. Up with Grandma. On the hill, blue lights on a far road are slow, purposeful, and uninterested in what anyone thinks. Cars point toward higher ground, noses up. Sentinels abandoned in lines like ladders laid down and forgotten. The dog sets its chin on the woman's knee. The dog knows this smell salt pushed through mud, electricity, everything shaken loose from varnished shelves in town. The child next to her, hair flattened where a hood pressed it, says, "Is that it?" And the woman says, "No," and hears in her own voice that she is telling the truth. The horizon has a muscle in it. A low arc is gathering itself. Not high yet, but wrong enough that even someone who has loved this edge of the Pacific for 49 years is new to it. Behind the hill, out of sight, volunteer radio operators who spend evenings in garages with extension ladders, antennas, and the stubborn patience learned from making something invisible work begin to bring a net to life. A call sign repeats. A second station answers from a county over. A third says, without excitement, roof is full. Students accounted for. No severe injury. Awaiting wave. In the Emergency Operations Center less than 10 miles away, a binder lies open to a page that lists bridge names and pencil marks the ones that will save lives if they hold a little longer. And the ones that will not be part of the conversation this time. People tell each other stories in this minute. They say the word 1700 to people who have never thought about a date that old. They say, Japan. not because they are thinking about anyone's enemy, but because the word gestures at far distances made close by water. In a federal office in Seattle, someone pulls a thin book from a shelf. Cascadia Rising, it says on the spine, the name of an exercise from years ago where grown adults ran a week of pretend so that this day would not come entirely dressed as surprise. Down in a bowl-shaped harbor to peninsulas down the coast, the sound that has been low and constant becomes something else. A throat clearing before a shout. Two men on a Coast Guard dock who have already cut 3 lines feel the weight in them change. The angle of pull altering, like a friend leaned on your shoulder unexpectedly. One of them looks up the channel mouth and sees not a glassy face or a cartoon wall, but a river running over itself, taking the shape of what will confine it in a few minutes. Streets, storefronts, alleys, the one gas station that sells worms. The first wave you can see clearly is not the first wave of this day. It is the first wave that will tell everyone with eyes who did not already believe. This is happening. A child squeezes a hand harder. Somewhere a locked pickup coughs an alarm like a dog left inside. On the school roof, a teacher who taught kids where to go in case of fire and where to crouch in case of a stranger in the hallway takes the hand of an old man who never had a hall pass in his life. They breathe, they stare into the place where beach meets beach, and the place is moving toward them. Everything that has happened so far has been the world inhaling. The exhale begins, and it is heavy. The wave that comes ashore is brown and complicated. A living room of engines and chairs in it. The square edge of a dock, a line of blue recycling bins like a fleet of small boats advancing on a town that does not want them. It does not crest like a surfer's story. It fattens and moves as something that does not care what you expected. In the wide mouth of a river, the line of the surge splits around sandbars, seeks the path of easiest ruin, finds the low places by instinct. It bites off chunks of lawn. It takes a line of pickets, like someone snapping matchsticks in a board hand. And yet the height on this first surge is not the worst. Everyone who can see the mouth of the bay or the break in the dunes is counting, not with numbers, but with the noticing animals do. And it is the next one they are afraid of. In a cove down the coast, at Cannon Beach, kids who have run this path after field days and during drills 20 times. Do it again for real now. Following the green men on the blue signs uphill into the timber. An old Labrador refuses to be carried and is carried anyway. 3 teenagers laughing the way fear comes out of them with the effort. One of them glances back and sees the ocean on their favorite stretch turn a color she has never seen. The exact brown of the river in a flood, only wider. And she stops for a single step in a universal, human betrayal of self-interest. She wants to know what the world looks like when it changes. Inland, in a building the color of nothing much, a utilities crew stands around a laminated map. The red dots on it are water mains that rupture in the ground they were never meant to see move like this. The blue dots are the ones we need to fix first. An engineer with a pencil behind his ear says, hospitals, fire, then dense, residential. And he sounds exactly like people in other rooms where other colors are used. Orange for fuel, green for wires, purple for phone. The words all rhyme. Because failure does. On a different floor in a different city, a nurse takes a neck brace in both hands and looks into a face for a long time. The face is steady. The person says, "Go. I'm fine." The nurse leaves. The brace goes somewhere else, where it is needed more. This is triage, the Latin of the day, and it will be a language everyone understands by the time the sun comes up again. The second pulse has not arrived. The town's speaker system fails in the act of being useful. Hem repeaters carry calm voices across valleys. A man with a vest, marked with 3 letters, speaks into a handheld and says, "Report wave height." Repeat. Report. The answer comes from 6 places at once. First surge to base of bank. Water past, harbor light. Edge of downtown, feet in the street. And then a voice that is younger than the others, steady, unafraid in the way someone new to duty sometimes is, says, "Second wave sighted. Larger than first." Along the Oregon coast, a family that left their keys in the ignition on purpose because the drills told them that's how you save strangers. A few seconds stands on a lookout platform that was for whales yesterday and is for everything now. The child in the middle has a shell in her pocket. She cannot resist touching a small compass of attention in the center of noise. A sheriff's deputy, sweat cold under a bright jacket, stares at the spot where Highway 101 ducks behind a stand of spruce. and fails to appear on schedule. He thinks about what he is going to say for the rest of his work life when someone asks him about this minute. He keeps his mouth shut. To the north, on a coast where Sita knows what salt is and what river is, and how to be both. The tower the tribe built in the marsh holds 36 more people than the number the sign at the bottom promised, and it is not mined. The concrete was poured with this day in mind. The rebar diagram looked like a basket in the blueprint. In the air, it is strong the way baskets are. By distribution, elders who saw the sky and the stairs when they cut the ribbon stand, and do not flinch when a small aftershock registers through their feet. One makes a small sound that is not fear and is not humor either. It is respect. Farther inland, under a city built for rain, the saturated soils of a valley floor work at the slow violence of dewatering. Liquefaction is the word the reports will use. People will come to hate the way that word tastes, like a smoothie. In reality, it is cabinets fallen open in kitchens on one side of a block and perfectly shut on the other. It is a single house sunk 8 inches lower than the one next to it. It is the slope to a cross street, so inconsistent that a bike left on a porch rolls as if pulled by an invisible child. And in along, an sangre zone, along a river where millions of gallons of fuel are stored in steel. On post-war soils, no one designed for this. There is a smell in the air that is not a metaphor. It is hydrocarbon. It is the scent of the last half a century. Small booms, popware valves, meet couplings. A slick blossoms and makes its way like a living thing toward a boom laid on the water for practice 100 times, and placed for real just once. The second wave arrives like a decision that had been deferred and is now due. It is higher, purposeful, less interested in feeling out the town's corners, and more interested in occupying them. It puts boats into trees. It takes a wall the way a river takes a bank and a flood, first with teeth, then with intention, then as if there had never been a wall at all. A man on the hill says out loud to no one that the grocery store will not open next week at 7. It is a sentence that should be sadder than it is. The sadness is deferred in the same way so many other ordinary feelings are, and will return in 3 days when someone wants coffee and the habit of peace, and finds neither. On the school roof, there is that sound humans make when scared animals that know one another reach for the sound that precedes a scream and then stop. The teacher counts again with her mouth moving and realizes she is not saying numbers anymore. She is just touching faces with her eyes. Down in the town, a stop sign leans and points at the wrong street as if changing the instruction will change the outcome. The students, matted with the salt air, begin to shake because the wind up here is not the wind down there. There is a moment in any long disaster where time knots. In living rooms, miles inland, people far from the coast watch a live camera feed that is frozen on a perfect frame. A small white house intact, a toy boat in the foreground, a dark wall approaching that cannot possibly be dark water. And understand that whoever set up that camera did not intend to record the end of anything. In a control room in Richland, an engineer whose whole job is risk watches a plot of shaking intensity scroll by on a screen that was designed for precision and does not offer comfort. In a volunteer fire hall in Grays Harbor County, the first 3 people who made it back down from the hill step into boots that are still damp from the last drill and do not call home, because they cannot make the decision whether not hearing is kinder. The air is full of small, salt and big noise. The wave rolls, and with it, everything. The edge of the school roof creaks not because it is failing, but because it does not want to carry any more of this view alone. A crow turns sideways in the wind and rides it, uninterested in human arguments. Somewhere a radio says a thing that has not been said in a very long time. Stand by for the third wave. The dog does not look back. The dog puts its nose on the horizon as if inhaling the ocean would make it smaller. When the third surge rolls ashore, it is not taller by much, but it is more thorough. It occupies basements, and then basements become ground floors. And then the idea of a floor loses sense, because the contents of the first have slipped out into the street. From the hill, you can pick out your place by color and shape, and then you cannot. A red door becomes a flash in chocolate milk, the last brightness before the whole palette blends. A propane tank bobs and spins, then sticks, then breaks loose and kisses a pickup truck. An embrace that should be funny, and is not. The wave leaves its own gifts behind. Buoys where no boat has ever been. The smallest fish in a kitchen bowl. A paper line of coupons nailed to a corkboard in a foyer that now ends in air. And then, because everything ends, even when it goes on longer than you can hold your breath, The waters will it runs back out like a thief who hears feet on the stairs. Its last act is unkindness. It takes what it can still take and pulls curtains from windows, tilts a refrigerator on its back and then on its face. Relents with the dirty sigh in ditches and against curbs and at the knees of those foolish or stubborn enough to be standing where they shouldn't. Down by the port, the big things that did not move this time. Piers built of ideas that learned from other places. Thick beeled pilings that found bedrock stand in a new geometry. Above the harbor, a hand-lettered sign on an ice chest that reads live bait bobs on a bush like a flag that misread the assignment. In Seattle and Portland and Eugene and Salem, the sound in rooms isn't the wave, it's the first hours of the thing humans do after a place is shaken apart. They start building it again, even if all they have is a list and a pencil. In Olympia, a man in a fluorescent vest checks on a neighbor with a hearing aid that will not hold a charge without power and gives him the battery pack he had in his pocket for himself. In a hospital block in downtown Portland, a night shift nurse meets a day shift nurse at a doorway and they make a vow to one another with their eyes so no one else has to hear it. A barista rides a bike through streets that feel tilted and hangs a handwritten note. Water for anyone. Come in. He points at a 5-gallon bucket, and it is funny that it is a coffee shop with no coffee for a few hours, and it is not funny at all. Down at the critical energy infrastructure, Hubbard's locals will save for the rest of their lives, with a weight they did not have. Yesterday people pull booms across the river with skiffs. On shore, others turn wheel after wheel. The plan has order and a weird beauty. This valve, then the next. Radio, report, move on. The smell is the smell of modernity and harm. Not everything fails, much holds. Some tanks shed their roofs calmly like hats. Others have their own ideas. It is a mess you can clean, but not easily. It will not be forgotten by planners again, if they are the right kind of planners. There will be better soil under the most dangerous things. And not just because of this day, but also because of a decade of people saying quietly in meeting rooms. We know this risk. We can fix Italiano. Up the coast on the school roof, a teacher lets herself sit for the first time in an hour and feels a telephone vibrate against her thigh. A single text comes through like a message in a bottle washed back with the EBDC. We're up. She doesn't know who sent it. It doesn't matter. She pictures an entire line of the coast sending that same couple of words to itself up and down the map. In Tokeland, elders lean on the tower's rail and begin telling the story. Well, it's still happening. Because that is one of the ways a people heals by. Keeping company with the truth before it cools. A child looks up and hears the word always where adults say, someday. In the days that follow, the geography will tell new stories. River mouths will be redrawn. Mudflats will reveal stumps that were still young when the last big one came. Maps will be printed with X's through buildings that stood this morning. Houses repurposed as icons for losses that will become lessons. The Cascade volcanoes will sit in the sun and snow looking innocent and be, for once, side characters. The aftershocks will be a season, popping like someone's infected memory. A week after this day, a woman will be in a grocery store in a city inland and feel the air change and drop to her knees before she knows what part of her body spoke. This will not be a story about who we were when it happened, not alone. It'll be a story about what we decided to be after. There is a plan in a mint green binder called a playbook in a room with no windows for days like this, and people used it. There is a set of recommendations called a resilience plan for a state where the ground remembered suddenly aspects of its personality everybody had filed as folklore, and some of it had been done bridges shored. Schools moved inland, tanks strapped, vertical evacuation towers built against laughter that dried up the first time the stairs filled with children. And there is a warning system called Shock Alert that used a handful of seconds to make the difference between steel in place and steel on the street. Scalpel paused and scalpel cutting the wrong nerve. Elevators empty or full. All of that mattered. All of it will matter more tomorrow when the budgets gather and the boredom returns. Along the length of this fault, this day was not the same day. It was worse in one cove than in another. It ran faster through one town and slower through the next. It gave one person in a truck the gift of stopping at just the right turnout to watch trees sway, and it took from another the museum of a living room that had been curated by a whole life. There will be numbers, and they will be unsatisfying as numbers are. There will be blame, and some of it will be true, and then there will be work, and all of it will be necessary. Far inland people who thought earthquakes lived in other People's lives will pull old pictures from trunks that show fallen chimneys from 1968. In the Midwest, and bolts in old walls in Charleston sewn there a century ago after a night when a city realized it was built on a drummer's skin. They will nod and understand that the map of risk in America is less about coasts than about remembering that the earth has its own borders. In Alaska, in California, in Missouri, the same story exists with different actors. The lesson is simpler than the fear. This is not personal. We live on a planet. The ground will argue. The measure of us are the bolts we add, the drills we run, the towers we build where the hill refuses, the water we set aside, the things we choose not to put on soils that behave like a dream at the wrong time of night. On the hill, sometime after the third surge has finished its statement, the woman with the dog stands at last. Her knees complain. She counts heads again without thinking. The melody of her mourning turned into a new song. When it is time, the group will go down the hill in careful steps. They will open the gym. Papers will go on tables. Names will be written. They will feel stupid for bringing a whistle, and then the whistle will find its work in a stairwell with a trapped voice. Tay will cry, and they will not, and both will be right. The dog shakes once, a full-body shiver that starts somewhere in its tail and ends somewhere past its ears, and looks up at her with the particular attention of animals who know what others want before the others do. She touches the gobin with the tova boot. She has lost things, and she is not. She looks at the line where sea meets sky. It is finally honest again. A plain declaration instead of a threat. She nods to it like you nod to a neighbor you had a bad argument with because you share a fence. There will be more earthquakes. The St. Andres to the south keeps its own, scheduled different rock. Different music, different last big story and next one. The middle of the country remembers in its river sand what happened when there were no cameras. The Atlantic coast mutters in its old stones about a day in the 19th century when Charleston shook and bolts went into walls that still show on facades like scars you wear with pride. This was not the only dangerous seam. It was only the one that took this day. It will be back. We will be different again by then because days like this make us think and work and change and argue and do better. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that changed the world.